Plastic straws represent 0.025% of the world's ocean plastics. Yet, when we talk about the ocean plastic pollution, they get a lot of attention from legislators and activists alike. So the question is, why? In reality, plastic straws are a symbol of something bigger. Single-use plastics that we use sometimes for just a few minutes and then throw away. In this video, I want to skip the feelings and get to the facts so you can have a bigger impact on the ocean plastic pollution with things you can do in your daily life that are more impactful than not using plastic straws. So if we go to the same level playing field as the people who rage at the idea of using plastic straws, we have to understand the most common plastic items that are found in oceans and rivers. The most common type of litter are bags, especially plastic bags. They often have, like plastic straws, a lot of bad publicity because they're extremely harmful, but in their case, seeing from the percentage, it's quite deserved. They can easily be carried by the wind and they are often mistaken as jellyfish by a lot of animals like sea turtles, and they try to eat them. Then you have plastic bottles, which are mostly made for single use. And finally you have food containers and wrappers. So if you want to focus your attention, choose to target only those 4 items and you will be targeting around 45% of all ocean plastic waste. This leads me to my second point. Make sure your items are well recycled. This allows for 2 key benefits. First, you reduce the need to create new plastics, and secondly, you ensure that the plastic you do recycle will not end up in the ocean. This recycling effort is not only important with your own trash, but it's also important with the trash you find along the way. It could be spontaneous like a hike or organized like a cleanup event. It doesn't really matter whether you're close to the ocean, a lake, or even a river, because as plastic doesn't degrade for centuries, it will most likely end up in the ocean through the wind, the rain, and the rivers. I will not give you a tutorial on how to properly recycle because it heavily depends on the area where you live. What I can tell you is that a lot of different plastics can be properly recycled. A good example of this are plastic bottles, which are commonly found on the ocean. They're often made of PET, which is a very common recycled plastic, so if the area where you live has recycling, you will probably be capable of recycling your water bottles. You can also recycle a lot of different other plastics that are much less common than water bottles. However, one big drawback of trying to be perfect with recycling is the fact that it can often be very complex. For example, you may need to go to different facilities for different types of plastics, and this whole process can be very time consuming. This is why you need to reconsider the amount of plastics that you do use. Because the plastic that is not used is a plastic that will not need recycling, and more importantly, is one that will not end up in the ocean. This is where the philosophy of the plastic straws comes from. It's actually to teach people to avoid to use single-use plastics so that we can all, little by little, with our everyday habits, have a better impact on the ocean plastic pollution overall. For example, you could be carrying your own reusable bags to the grocery store instead of relying on their own single-use, thin and thickle plastic bags. Another option that could also improve your health, for example, is to cook more often rather than relying on processed food that are often in single-use containers. This may sound very ridiculous to you and very mundane, but as we've seen, most of the ocean plastics is just normal, everyday litter. Even after taking care of all the waste, there's still something missing. Sometimes the most harmful plastics are the ones you don't see. This is where we enter the world of microplastics. In my research for this video, this is what surprised me the most, and it did led me to change my own personal habits. This is not only an environmental concern, but it's also a health concern, as microplastics could cause DNA damage, cancer, and even infertility. The best way to avoid microplastics is to replace your everyday plastic items that you use for non-plastic alternatives. For example, plastic chopping boards. It really hits very close to home because for the past several years I've been using a plastic chopping board myself. So when I realized that it was releasing millions of microplastics into my food, I made the decision to purchase another plank, this time made of wood. Then you have plastic food containers that are often used to bring food outside your home. I realized that even the microwave safe containers actually release microplastics into your food. So the best alternatives would be to replace them with glass or metal containers. Then you have synthetic clothing, which especially when washing releases millions of microplastics into the water stream. The alternative, for example, could be to use cotton or hemp clothing. And finally, a very ironic culprit is seafood. Yes. With so many plastics thrown into the ocean, it is only normal that animals will reach it either by eating, absorbing, or even just by breathing. Some people call it karma, some people call it basic science. I will not go and enter in this debate. However, I'll give you my tips to minimize your microplastics. First, you should minimize your intake of shellfish because shellfish are filter feeders, therefore they have to absorb large amounts of water for it to feed, and they absorb therefore a lot of microplastics. And secondly, you should focus on eating fish where you eat the fillet and not the whole fish, because a lot of the microplastics are actually found in the guts. If you're interested in seafood sustainability, I think you should watch my video on how to buy sustainable tuna. And also, you could sign up to my newsletter, link in the description below. We'll go more in depth about ocean-friendly consumption. In there, you will find summaries of my videos, you will find specific product recommendations to take action today about your ocean-friendly lifestyle, and additional lifestyle tips to decrease your footprint. See you there.